On this video, we're going to be looking at some of the pricing strategies that oligopolists can adopt in order to improve their position. It's a pretty common high mark question, perhaps looking at two different pricing strategies that firms could adopt, or looking at perhaps one pricing and one non-pricing strategy that a firm can adopt. The only thing I'd say be wary of is read the question carefully, because sometimes it's expressed in terms of the firm improving their profit, sometimes their market share. So if, for example, you talk about price collusion in order to improve market share, that's wrong, because price collusion at best maintains your market share. And because you're raising prices, it's likely to decrease your market share. I'm going to assume that you are familiar with my game theory video and how to produce a game theory matrix. So for example, if the question is about pricing strategies Tesco could pursue to increase profit, well, you'd set up a game theory matrix. Ideally, you set up one with an equilibrium, and ideally, one where collusion could produce a better result. So this is one like that. What if the question is for you to evaluate pricing and non-pricing strategies? Well, you pick one of each, and you'll notice all I've done is I've changed the words in the matrix. What if we change the industrial sector to banking? Evaluate strategies Barclays could pursue to increase profits. Rather than talking about prices, I'm now talking about interest rates. But apart from that, everything is exactly the same. I do not like to learn new numbers. I do not like to try to think on my feet in an exam. So learn one matrix and apply that to pretty much any question, with one exception. And this is the exception if it's a question about market share. Now, the thing about market share is if one firm increases its market share, another firm must decrease it. In game theory terms, we call that a zero-sum game. So I'm assuming here that a firm that engages in a price war where the opposition doesn't will increase its market share by 8%. And if they both do the same thing, there's going to be no increase in market share. So we finish up with, again, a situation where we have a Nash equilibrium where they are both going to decrease their prices, and in reality, of course, neither of them would then increase their market share. That's the only exception. Normally, I like to deal with exactly the same figures no matter what the question is. So the first possible strategy is collusive pricing. Watch my video on collusion. What are you doing? You're price fixing with the other suppliers. The aim is to drive up collective price and drive up collective profit. It's quite difficult sometimes for the authorities to prove, especially if you're dealing with tacit collusion. So that's why you do it. Why not do it? Well, it's illegal, subject to massively heavy fines. Fines for big players like banks and airlines have been in the hundreds of millions of euros. And remember, the authorities can use their techniques to try to get firms to confess by issuing leniency, complete leniency for the first firm to confess, rewarding whistleblowers within the firm. And of course, it might break down naturally because high prices lead to a tendency for firms to supply more. Going rate pricing, as the name implies, is where you are charging roughly the same price as your rivals, the going rate. If you look at that illustration on the left hand side, it comes from the Waterston's best-selling lists. Look at the prices of the 8 books shown, the 8 top books. 7 of them have the same recommended retail price, that's the one that's crossed out, of £8.99, and they are all being sold for the same price by Waterston's, £7.49. So we have the going rate. It doesn't matter how many pages there are in each book or how much each book costs to produce, they are being sold for exactly the same amount. There is only one exception out of those 8 books. Obviously, going rate pricing is relatively safe. You're not going to provoke your rivals into a price war. However, on the minus side, if you're simply charging the same as anyone else, you're not going to increase your market share unless you've got some really good non-pricing strategies, which again would set up a rather nice game theory matrix that suggests you're going to go for a non-pricing strategy like branding. Now, one strategy that you could adopt is to be the first to move on price. Now, that could mean you raise the price. If you raise the price and your customers are brand loyal, they're inelastic, then that would mean that you're going to be the first to make profits. You're going to be then able to use those profits to perhaps improve aspects of your business and maintain that lead. Alternatively, you could be the first to try cutting your price. Now, if demand is elastic, then that will mean that you're going to be able to gain customers from elsewhere, including your rivals, and you've managed to increase your market share, which potentially you could use to convert in the long run into brand loyalty. So either way, if you're the first, you might get benefits, or of course you might not, because you might get the market wrong. So an alternative pricing strategy is to follow the leader. So you wait for someone else to move, and if what they do is successful for them, then you follow them. Whereas if they don't seem to succeed, you sit back and you rest on your laurels and you haven't made that mistake. And possibly you could even learn from their mistakes. I know this is a non-pricing example, but the first store card that was tried in the grocery business was by Sainsbury's. They tried it and it failed. Tesco learned from the mistake. They launched their own highly successful club card, and it was that turned them into the #1 grocers in the UK. So why not follow the leader? Tesco followed the leader. It's very successful. Well, of course, had Sainsbury's been successful, Tesco would have been quite far behind had they then adopted the same scheme. Now, the first of the strategies that's on the spec, in other words, they could ask you a specific question about it, is to engage in a price war. And what that means is you are going to undercut your rivals. You're going to be charging less than your rivals. When should you do it? Well, if you're strong and they're weak, then that's a pretty good time to engage in a price war, to start a price war. So going back a few years now, when Morrison's merged with Safeways, it cost them a lot of money, because mergers do. And obviously you have problems when you're trying to sort of knit two firms together. Tesco leapt upon that opportunity to launch a price war that Morrison's weren't in a strong position to confront. So your aim in a price war is to boost your market share, which hopefully in the long run you can turn into loyal customers, as to a certain extent Tesco's managed to do. Morrison's were held up for about 3 years by that price war. So what's your counterbalance? Well, if you're going to cut your prices, particularly in something like supermarkets where margins are very, very low, then your profits will fall. You might even move into a loss-making situation. And it's likely that your rivals are going to retaliate. So though Tesco were targeting Morrison's, Asda's didn't know that, and so they then retaliated against Tesco. And of course, a price war, which you hope to be a short, sharp thing, might turn out to be a long, drawn-out affair. World War I was supposed to be, quote, over by Christmas. It actually lasted 4 years. And of course, you might lose the war. Hitler started World War II. He didn't turn out on the winning side. My favourite in an exam is predatory pricing. Whereas a price war is there to increase your market share at a rival's expense. If they die, fine. Predatory pricing is where you are actually trying to kill off a rival. Because a predator, like a lion, does not want to reduce a zebra's market share, it wants to kill it. Now, if you think about a boxing match, at the beginning the referee calls the fighters together and they want a fair fight. Two aspects of that. So they want competition, the fight, but it must be fair. Now, the thing about predatory pricing is you are reducing your price, but you are reducing your price below your cost level. So you could not make a long-term profit at that price. So that is not fair. That is unfair. As a result of which it is illegal and subject to heavy fines. The same 10% of revenue figure that we use for collusion is also used here. You will make losses because you are selling below your cost, and of course it might not work. On the other hand, it might be quite difficult for the authorities to prove, because though we can draw a lovely little diagram, it's a dead easy diagram. Look at that, just on my left hand side. Easy to draw it, just drawing a price line below the average variable cost. In reality, where costs are allocated might be difficult to prove. Again, a very simple example, if you read a newspaper this morning or you're going to this evening, you probably picked up a free one, a Metro or a Standard. If it's free, it must have been selling below cost, because literally the price is nothing but no, because the revenue from newspapers doesn't just come from the cover price, it also comes from advertising. So actually demonstrating that they are predatory pricing is difficult. The last one on the spec is limit pricing. I try to avoid this if I was you. It's really difficult to explain it, because you're not trying to kill off an existing rival, you are trying to stop potential rivals from joining the industry, and it depends upon the incumbent firms, the existing firms, having lower costs than potential rivals. Now, if you think that's through, that is likely to be the case. For example, you know your customers, you have a customer database that you can send offers out to. You don't have to go through the costs involved in setting up the business, because you've already done that. So you are likely to have cost advantages over your rivals. So what you are doing is you are reducing your price so that you're not profit maximizing, but you are pricing below their cost so they cannot make a profit, but above your cost so you can make a profit. So you are limiting their desire and ability to join the market. Now, the cons are it might be illegal. I've not been able to find out the actual legality of this. It will definitely, however, be frowned upon by the competition authorities. Remember, they want a fair fight. They want a fight. They don't want you to keep potentially profit-making rivals out. And of course, the big thing is you need to know the costs of a rival who isn't even there yet, a potential rival. And that's going to be quite tricky. So if you're in a college, you might just be able to guess the cost of a rival college, but not a new college that hasn't even set up yet. The diagram is the easiest one of all. You just draw two cost curves, two average cost curves, one for the potential rival sitting above yours, and you throw in the limit price, which is between the two of them. And that's it on pricing.